Hello, everyone. It's Mark Thurman, and I'm recording another session in support of our Connected Things 2021. It's all about 5G conference. As you'll all recall, since you're probably watching this from our YouTube or our web channels, that this is hopefully our last digital event. We've done 2 years worth, and both last year and this year, there's roughly 15 or 20 hours of content. So there's a wealth of information that you can look through, and each of the conversations is individually linked, so you can pick and choose through the ones that you'd like. As I just mentioned to my two guests, who I'm going to have introduce themselves in a second, we are hopeful and optimistic that with a return to campus this fall, that we'll have some sort of informal event, mini Connected Things, to allow people to get back together and network. And I'd say keep watching this space, keep watching our website for any more announcements. But I want to first of all thank our friends at American Tower. They've been a long-term sponsor, so we really appreciate the sponsorship and the friendship and the connections that we all get from each other, and from particularly Ed. You've been a very kind sponsor of ours, and you've been a great friend to the program, so we appreciate that. I'll ask you and Youssef to introduce yourselves and give us your title, and then I'll kind of pick up talking a little bit more about private 5G, 5G at the edge, and edge computing, and the role of infrastructure. Ed?
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be back with you, and I'm looking forward to getting together physically in the future. I think Connected Things and the forum has done some fantastic content over the last few years. We're happy to be a sponsor and proud to be part of today's discussion. Ed Knapp here again. I've done this before on the CTO at American Tower. Work a lot in the wireless space, in particular on 5G, as we look to expand our capabilities as the global leader in tower infrastructure. And I'll turn it over to Youssef, and he can open up his background, and we can get into the questions.
Thank you. Happy to be here. My name is Youssef Abdelilah. I'm Director of Innovation and Strategy, and I report into Ed in the Office of the CTO. And my role is to look at current and emerging technology, how we can provide solution to our customer in the wireless domain.
Excellent. So welcome to you both. Let's frame up a little bit more on American Tower, just as a refresher. You are the market leader. You're a global company. Roughly how many towers and masts, as they say in the UK, do you guys have?
Yeah, so we've actually grown a lot since even the beginning of this pandemic. You know, we closed a number of deals early last year, but just this year we had a transformative deal where we acquired Telxius assets, which was generally centered in Europe, but it also extended into Latin America. So our portfolio of towers is now over 210,000 sites. And those also operate now in 23 countries. And we continue to look at that business as our primary, let's call it revenue and beneficiary in terms of the wireless growth. But, as Youssef and I will talk about, our team, both in corporate from an innovation and with regional partners that we have in the various areas across the globe, we've been tackling some other challenges as well to extend that platform and that portfolio. One area is in power and energy, which we continue to look at, particularly with renewables and in certain markets which are challenged at the grid level. Another area is in edge data center. We've made some investments in that area, and we look forward to how 5G and low latency will translate into new applications that we all believe will be beneficial to not only consumers, but the enterprise. And obviously IoT is a factor there. We also have investments in fiber networks, where the transport between data centers and towers, or towers and the internet, those are all key elements to support our mobile network operator partners. And then the last area is more of a broader bucket of wireless connectivity. So everything from satellites to looking at in-building systems, looking at street level smart city activities, automotive, and various other elements of, let's say, fixed and rural wireless connectivity, as we start to try to figure out how to do more to connect the unconnected, or folks that are less than fully connected around the world. So those are all the key elements of our platform and innovation.
No, this sounds great, and I think we talked in the preparatory call about perhaps having a fall conversation about digital communities. So I want to tease that a little bit. I know you've got an initiative there that our friend Sanjay Agarwal is leading. So hopefully we can get some more information to our audience, in the early fall timeframe. I want to kind of tee up our conversation with 3 data points. Gartner says by 2029, there'll be 15 billion IoT devices attaching to an enterprise's infrastructure. And they further say many of which will be at the edge. Edge will be a theme here. The edge compute market, according to IDC, is expected to grow 12% to $250 billion in the next 3 years. The last data point is our friends at Transforma, which is the basis of the old Gartner-Mackiner research. But Transforma say that the installed base of cellular IoT devices will grow to 5 billion devices by 2030. So Gartner 15 billion overall, 5 billion cellular by 2030. And this is, Youssef, this is, I think, pertaining to your side of the world. Annual shipments of devices that will be deployed on dedicated private networks will grow to roughly 50 million devices. So part of what we're going to talk about is edge, the importance of edge, and what are the various flavors of private network. The market research organizations and the numbers I just cited indicate that it's a hot spot. In my day job at IBM, I see a lot of action on edge, on MEC. So what's going on and what's the role of the infrastructure provider, namely you guys? Youssef.
Okay. So definitely, I think there you're going to see private LTE, private 5G, enabling and solving the gap that existed between Wi-Fi and public network, where now the enterprise and cities and even in rural area will leverage the technology of 5G to provide their own dedicated LTE technology that can enable not only IoT, but also your typical communication that we love and grow and love today, that we use today. So they're going to have control to deploy that network. And there are a lot of cities that leverage in a spectrum in US called CBRS band. That's about 150 megahertz of it that was released by the AFCC. It used to be called the Innovation Band, which enabled basically for the first time in history to deploy private network. And as I said, does enable a lot of application. And edge is really critical, especially when you're talking about low latency application. You need to basically have all the data local to the user or to the application. That's when edge is really going to be necessary. And 5G, that's a critical part of part of the 5G network, end-to-end network. And just for people that don't know a little bit about CBRS, CBRS, like I said, is a band. It stands for Citizen Broadband Radio Service. Is a 150 megahertz spectrum. Is a multi-tier, is a shared band. The tier 1 is basically the Navy and the Army. They used to use this band, not as frequently, and now they're sharing it with everybody. And then there's a license part called the protected access license. Is about 70 megahertz of it, which completed the bid just recently. And then there's a general availability, what we call general authorized access, and that's lightly licensed, but is controlled. And there is an element called SAS, which is Spectrum Access System, and that's basically the secret sauce here. The idea here is that it manages the spectrum and makes sure that it optimizes the operation of that spectrum. This way, everybody have access to that spectrum. And that's critical. That's what makes really, as I said, the shared spectrum paradigm really innovative and give access to this spectrum to all. And of course, if people that have actually a bid on the PAL, now they have your regular typical licensed spectrum. And truly, having that spectrum has really enabled, as I said before, the first time, at least in the US, starting in the US, the private network application, and people are widely using private network to deploy IoT application, be it large public venues. For example, we've done deployment way early, many years ago, where for the first time we were able to do VR, transport the fan into a NASCAR running at 200 miles an hour. That's something that was impossible to do before any other technology that had enabled things like that. And there are cities that actually have deployed, for example, in Tucson, Arizona, they've deployed their own private network, the entire city. They have looked at the different technology, but the private network has enabled them to do provide basically connectivity to the K-12 based on COVID-19 situation and solve the digital divide for the first time that you can do that, and also enable smart IoT application for their citywide, and looking to expand to various applications.
All right, so let's kind of dive in a little bit further. That's a great way to kind of lay the groundwork for it. So if I'm an enterprise or a municipality in the U.S. and I desire a private network of some sort, by inference, I believe that you're saying, well, CBRS is a way to do it. It may not be the way, but it's a way. So what happens? So I'm XYZ company. I'm the I'm the CIO. Do I call American Tower or an equivalent company? Do I go to the government? Or do I go to an integrator? What am I doing to, first of all, what's the decision process? And then who do I call to get this this network plumbed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first thing I would recommend, and I would set the ground, there's an alliance, used to be called CBRS Alliance, now it's called OnGo Alliance, and I know it's a new name, but the name is part of brand in any solution. And the alliance role is to really not only help answer that question, but create an ecosystem of devices and partner to make deploying private network easy. So if anybody has any interest, you can go to that OnGo Alliance. In fact, we just released a book called OnGo for Dummies. It's really cover a lot of these it covers a lot of this information, but more importantly, to the website of the Alliance, you could, we have a directory established that you can identify what kind of partners that can help you deploy the network. I can give you an example, for example.
Well, hang on. So I could use that with my old favorite M2M.
There you go. There you go. I think I may have a copy of it here. I'll show you the OnGo for Alliance here. In fact, here it is. Since you showed it, this is what it looks like. Can you see it?
Yes, I can. Hold it still for 1 second.
Yeah.
CBRS and OnGo for. I love it. It's that. It looks like you licensed the for Dummies brand as well, because it's. I have the same picture of the same nerd.
Well, we work with the. It seems to be standard. We work with the for Dummies, right? They're the Wiley brand, right? So we work with them, and so internally we created this collateral, part of our branding and marketing, to educate basically the audience. So if you go to the site now, it's called OnGo. One of the things that the Alliance is working on is, besides having the ecosystem and you can have access to the people, device, whoever you want to work with, is the certification program, which is really critical. If you look at, for example, Wi-Fi technology, if you have the Wi-Fi logo, you know that you can buy parts from different vendors and it would work. Similarly here, we're trying to do something similar. So you have people that do IoT natively, and as long as you have that OnGo brand, then you know that it's certified and can enable that communication. So that's one way I would address it. What is the process? So let's say you go there and you love American Tower. You said, hey, look, I need to work with the third party, and I'm an enterprise, for example, and let's say I know nothing about this. I just heard this is really good technology, and I need cellular connectivity here in my my building. So we basically bring the relationship with the, we have the know-how. So you go to typical process where, once we understand what is it that you need to solve, what is the problem, and what is the use case, then there's the RF design engineering that you do, and then we acquire all the access points. They call CBSD. If it's indoor, there's certain power. There's about 1 watt power for indoor, 50 watt for outdoor. So we look at if this is an pure indoor or pure outdoor, or is it hybrid. Then after we do the typical RF design, you basically will deploy the network, and you optimize it for that use case. And the mechanism, how it works, once you acquire the access points, is there's this thing called SAS. Like I mentioned, it's called is the system access system, which is a directory that manages that spectrum. So we bring all these ecosystem partner, and deploy that network. And we also would do the device themselves. And now most of the phones have this band. Is technical term for it is the B48, band 48. So if you look at the iPhone or what have you, and you go, do I have the support? If you look at the frequency band supported, you see B48. That means you support in CBRS band. And then there's some SIM provisioning and stuff like that. It has to happen so that your phone can connect to this network. And that's how we work in a nutshell.
So that's for phones, but for IoT devices,
yes,
you've got to presume that it supports the right band. And the way, if I'm an enterprise CIO, but I'm not a wireless guru, all I need to know is if the certs are from OnGo or the former CBRS Alliance, all the stuff should work. And it sounds like OnGo will provide some resources and help you kind of stitch it all together. Is OnGo also helping acquire the spectrum, or is that through American Tower? Or again, I don't want to. I mean, you're the sponsor. I want to focus on you, but you have other peers in the business as well.
Sure. No, that's a good question. So the SAS that I mentioned, which is the Spectrum Access System, that's what manages the spectrum. So there's a small lightly fee. Let's talk about general access. I'm not even talking about the license part of it, which is the second tier. Let's talk about the third tier, which is availability to everyone. There's 80 megahertz available, just like Wi-Fi is then licensed. This is slightly licensed, which is controlled and managed by that database to AI. It sits on the cloud, and you manage basically the distribution of that spectrum. So let's say I'm inside the building. If you work with a third party like American Tower or anybody else, they're going to do the network. They will manage all that for you. So there'll be turnkey solution. If you're going to do it yourself, then you have to reach out and contact a radio company. You have to go reach out to the SAS company, and they are 5 approved company by the FCC that can basically have the SAS elements, which is a software. And you have access to the utilization of those bands, and then they'll be able to manage that spectrum for you. So that's how, in a nutshell, it would work. In terms of the IoT, and you said, I mentioned the SIM provision, and I want to add something to the phone and answer your question about IoT devices.
Of course.
Most of the new phone you see, they becoming basically a dual SIM. One is called hard SIM, like your typical SIM that you physically touch and put it in there, and one is a eSIM or soft SIM or embedded SIM, which basically to some sort of QR, you'll be able to download all this, profile, and there you go. You can start basically connected. Okay. With the IoTs today, you could see most of the IoT have a multi-protocol. You heard of Zigbee, Z-Wave, LoRaWAN, and stuff like that. What a lot of the people have within the building, they have these gateways, right? And this gateway communicate with different protocol. And most of the time when you go to in building, like a hospitality, you have certain protocol for the smart lock. And, they have different protocol for the smart light. Just because they're more efficient for certain application. Right. Now that gateway need redundant connectivity. Most of the time they have an either Wi-Fi or GSM, the old technology, cellular technology, and also they may have Ethernet for not only for the power. Now with the private LTE, you'll be able to create another redundant connectivity because this becomes mission critical. As you go to natively, a lot of these IoT companies are more and more adding this cellular connectivity directly to their native gateway. So now you don't have to deal, the user does not have to deal with all these authentication. That is done already for you. So if you hire a third party to deploy the network, part of that SIM provisioning and management, it'll be done, for you. And the IoT devices today will be communicating using whatever the protocol they're using today.
Okay.
So maybe just to jump in here.
Please.
So I think, Mark, there are multiple ways to go build that system. If you're the CIO, you want to unbundle it, as Youssef said, you can go to the Alliance, you can find the devices you want for your use case, you can find access points in the marketplace, procure that, put it together, turn it up. Let's say you wanted to build out the MIT campus. In theory, you have nothing blocking you from going to do that. Some students can go and say that we're going to put a private CBRS network and run some test cases or IoT robots or drones across campus, and that should be all coordinated properly with the SAS, as Youssef said. And I think that opens up this innovation opportunity for lots of folks to come and play in the wireless space. Whereas, for in the past, you had licensed spectrum and wide area public networks, which compete on the merits of their coverage and capacity and device relationships, which we all use. And those wide area networks will continue. If there's an opportunity to augment that with private networks, that's what we can do here. And then American Tower is really interested in enabling that ecosystem. We help, and we have the skills to build it out. A lot of that's on the history of our DAS, or distributed antenna systems, which we have put in many properties, not just domestically, but around the world. But there are other partners in the ecosystem that you can turn to. The operators themselves may choose to want to turn on and build out a network at a warehouse or a factory. You have managed service providers that come in similar to like us that would want to offer that. And then the OEMs, the folks that actually build the equipment and run networks today, they can do that, including some of the folks who have started in the Wi-Fi domain, although that has different requirements and skill sets, including many of the unlicensed, let's call it protocols, where you got to get credentials and you got to have security. So it really comes down to the use cases and the things that you're trying to solve. What problem are you trying to solve? And I think that's where Youssef spends a lot of his time, looking at the innovations, looking at the problems that need to be solved for a private network, and then offering the best solution that we can bring with our partners.
My assumption, based on what you both said, that it's a lot faster to go work with a service provider like American Tower or others with similar capabilities than kind of, getting an ingredients list, getting a recipe, and piecing this together. So I guess my question would be, if I'm an enterprise and I've got, I want to do a private factory, essentially a network for my factory, what's the time period from the word go to go pull all this together in rough terms? Is it years, months, weeks,
with
days?
COVID or without COVID?
Well, I don't want to get into any controversial comments. Let's assume COVID has completely abated.
Okay.
That's a fantastic question you ask, and this is one of the value proposition actually of CBS. It's like Wi-Fi. It's Wi-Fi economic and go-to-market deployment to go on air. It's like Wi-Fi. So it can take weeks, literally. And that's the challenge that you have in current technology when you deploy cellular. It takes like from small cell to DAS, and then I'm not bashing any technology. Like Ed said, our goal is to provide the best-in-class wireless solution at the best economics, given whatever the current technology that exists, right? And those technology takes about anywhere from 12 to 18 months. Well, on the other hand, ongoing Wi-Fi similarly can take literally weeks. In less than a month, you can have the network up and running for private network.
So my theoretical factory in New Jersey that's in the chemical business, I just made all this up.
Sure.
I have a campus. I've got both offices and factory facilities. What you both said is in a couple of weeks, call it 3 to 5 weeks, from the word go, I can be operational with a either private LTE or private 5G network for my connected devices. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. 5G is still in the works. I think we released 5G now just because, again, the ecosystem are, slowly showing up. That's the same thing that the Alliance, we have worked for the past year to make really LTE 4G available now. There's over 180 devices, and the same members are once you get one, is a matter of a software upgrade to go to the 5G.
No, this makes sense.
I just qualify that, because if you're talking about a campus and you're talking about multiple buildings and large facilities, it's not a weak thing. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the ability to get something physical like a network in a box and deploy that on existing wiring and cabling, if you have to do a lot of heavy lifting to put other networking components and other things to make it work, then that's probably going to take more time. But if you have the infrastructure in place and you had Wi-Fi and you can then overlay that with additional access points, you could be operational fairly quickly. It's just a matter of the scope, the scale, and what pre-existing brownfield versus greenfield infrastructure is there. So I think the job will vary based on a lot of parameters.
Of course.
But you have to have the core network. You could argue the core network's something you want to rent in the cloud. You may not want to have your own core network to operate on-prem, but then again, you may want local breakouts. So you want security to manage those applications that you don't want the traffic to go back over the public internet. So there's a number of those types of things that impact time.
Well, just to add to what Ed said, the core network, think of the analogy I'll make is Wi-Fi. It's similar like Wi-Fi would deploy like Wi-Fi. Would Wi-Fi need access point, need some Ethernet cabling and fiber, some IDF switches? It's similar like that. And like Wi-Fi has a core that can be basically on-prem on the cloud. Similarly, the LTE technology has what we call evolved packet core, or 5G core as they call it now. And that's a software element can reside on-prem, on the cloud, or some hybrid of sort.
Okay. I'm just watching the clock to make sure we don't go over, because I could probably talk about this for 3 hours, and probably you guys could too, but I want to make sure that the audience hasn't tuned out. We touched on this in the pre-call. Can you touch on very briefly the regulatory constraints by broad region to the extent that you can? For example, it's my understanding that in Canada, you can't go out and buy your own spectrum. Are there other places like Canada where you've got to team up with an operator? You could talk about the EU, what they're doing and all that for Industry 4.0.
Yeah, so that's another great question. So because of the success that with the shared spectrum, the CBRS, is having, other regions around the world are looking to this and see how they can really adopt some sort of similar shared, spectrum. Because LTE is quite powerful technology, and you need spectrum, right? And I think one of the success that Wi-Fi has is unlicensed. But when you have things unlicensed, it's not managed. It's real control. As I said, this having your own HOV lane, and you can see is well controlled, that you can really manage and get the performance you need via capacity, mobility, or not to forget security. There are regions, like for example in Germany, they've released a spectrum about is around 3.7 gigahertz. About 100 megahertz of it is available. It's called local. So an entity, an enterprise can actually apply for that to their regulation and get 100 megahertz to do private network. So they can do that today. There are regions in France as well. Other place like the UK, they have similar model as the Canada, where they basically work with the MNO, and there are other regions where the MNO are leasing the spectrum as well for private network. Because a lot of these, is to your example, factory, they need private network to have efficient robot, because they need mobility and security, and efficiency start from the fact that they pick a widget from the manufacturer line and drop it here, and that needs really a control latency, not unpredictable. It has to be really predictable, and that's what the technology gives you. In other regions around the world, like in LATAM as well, like Chile is looking to open up 50 megahertz of that spectrum. It's not released yet, but every region are looking at this to see how we can provide spectrum for private network, and we see that private LTE and private 5G adoption is only going to increase.
Are there any regions that you're aware of that do not have any plans in the near term to offer private LTE or private cellular spectrum?
Not on top of my head. I think, to my understanding, and this is why in the Alliance we actually are broadening our reach to support 3GPP, given that it is a global standard. We're trying to share the knowledge and best practice with different regions, and helping them and enable them to adopt something similar to this. So we only see that more and more region going to try to adopt some form, providing either share or local spectrum.
So I've also heard from one of the larger MNOs that their private LTE or private 5G use cases include what they're calling a hybrid model, and I don't think it's unique to this particular MNO. What are you seeing out there in terms of hybrid use cases? So you're on the factory campus or the office campus, you're tracking assets, and then certain assets, when they leave, then move over to the public network. Are you seeing that a lot?
Yeah, so you're describing what we call a neutral host, and that's something actually we're leading in the Alliance, and we're trying to establish what are some of the best practices, and we're working with the carriers and trying to understand their requirement to make it really easy to people that have private network. And for example, they cannot afford to deploy DAS. That private network could be turn into a neutral host, where basically have that seamless communication between outdoor and indoor. So you switch from a public network to a non-public, or what we call private network, seamlessly. And we're working on enabling, basically, similarly, we started with private network, now we shift into neutral host. And that also opens opportunity for the mid-tier of the enterprises, because, Class A or the marquee building, those can afford DAS because that's really an expensive solution today and has an ROI for the MNO to justify that expense. But however, the mid-tier, this technology will enable for the first time where you can have that network host seamless connectivity from the in-building.
Yeah, one point to add to that is the non-public network 5G's done some work in the standards there, and you can think about let's say a shared network, say a public network shared amongst multiple operators, like we do with DAS, but do that with sort of active RAN equipment, even O-RAN, right? So you can open that up, and then the operators can connect to that, so their subscribers, when they move in and out of that facility, can have the communication as if they're in the wide area network. Yet locally, you could have a private network, and you could slice different, or let's call it manage different requirements from a use case perspective across those two functionalities, depending on how the spectrum is partitioned or what spectrum you're using. So it actually gets pretty interesting, and no one's put all those pieces together yet. We're working on some projects like that. One in Aachen, Germany, where we hope to be able to enable those types of capabilities.
I think, and I'm going to do this without any preparatory warning. Perhaps if we were able to do this live event in the fall, we can have one or both of you there just to kind of talk about this and be available for the audience to kind of chat about this, because I think this is an important concept. And in my my day job work, I see a lot of this. I see a lot of companies trying to sort out and figure out what's their play. When do they use a private network? Who do they call first? And I always think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the long lead items are generally spectrum and infrastructure. So I'm assuming you're getting the first call, and then who do they bring in? Because I think it's if I'm an enterprise, it's some of the existing service providers or vendors, and it may be a whole bunch of new ones that I don't even know. So I think it would be interesting to kind of continue this conversation over several sessions and hopefully a live networking session. But I guess my last question for this particular segment would be, where do you see things going? I hate to do the, where do you see things going in 5 years comment, so I won't frame it up as 5 years, but over the next period of time, where do you see this whole private network thing going? Is it primarily enterprise and factories, the Industry 4.0? Is it municipalities? Is it, what are kind of the if you looked at bubbles, what are the big bubbles here? Youssef.
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, I think this is phenomenal. It's the first time I can do LTE and take advantage of all the good stuff I couldn't do with the Wi-Fi. And again, I'm not bashing into technology, because ultimately what you're going to see in the trend is convergence of all the technology. In fact, to add that mentioned 5G specification, they're working on to provide some sophisticated way of routing the packet to the BIS network, and the handset are getting sophisticated with now. If you happen to be in building and Wi-Fi happen to be the BIS network at that local place, why not? You jump to that one. If there's a private LTE, you jump to that one. If it's public, you go to the other one. The idea is to provide the experience. Everybody's after that experience. If the customer is happy, then you can imagine the benefit, right? So what we see is that this use case you mentioned are starting now. Industry 4.0, we're already working on that, and we see people adopting that. Finally, they're going to cut the cabling, because they need mobility to be able to move around the warehouse. You're going to see that in casinos, for example. They cannot put this machine in, and they want them connected, but they will never put them on Wi-Fi because of security, because of mobility. So similarly, also now in different areas, I mean, we've done this actually for a large public venue. We don't have fiber trench. That's expensive. You can put one of these radios, LTE for 5G, and provide fixed wireless access in a remote area, provide for Uber, Lyft, or point of sales, because they provide all those values, benefit that you can have. Like I mentioned, latency, low latency, security, which is really critical. Nobody wants to have their transaction credit card hacked. And now with this, it gives you that peace of mind. So we see the adoption of 5G only exploding. A private network, I should say, leveraging 5G. They're starting with 4G right now, but they easily move into 5G. And I think in terms of it's going to start with the factory, of course, and the large public venue that they have will identify use case like robot or a high-speed mobility application, an IoT application. That's going to be the first use cases, of course, including the fixed wireless access I mentioned. But ultimately, municipality going to start looking at this from smart transportation, EMS. It's just like a new technology, like Wi-Fi it's 20 years it's been in the making, right? And this is new, that's starting, that's giving them control. And one thing that we didn't talk about, which we know that having data, access to data is really critical, because that basically drive not only innovation, but you can drive and create bespoke engagement with the user and customer, and having that insight for the first time in history, in my opinion, because in Wi-Fi, you were able to take advantage of that, right? And provide all these marketing things. But here you can start now customize all the smart thing and go into the digital, what we call digital twin. And this is going to enable you to provide customized application to enhance the quality of life of the users and citizens.
Youssef, are you saying that if you control your own private network, that you have access to the data?
Absolutely.
IoT data?
Absolutely.
That's an interesting use case that I'm glad you dropped in at the end, because I think that's really important. I know in the IoT world, you can't really, if you're doing a deployment that rides on a cellular network, the cellular operator, Verizon, Vodafone, AT&T, cannot see the data. It's they're a trusted transport, and a lot of people get confused and think that they can see medical data or whatever the data is that's going over the pipe. So what you actually just described is one. I think you described security, the ability to move an asset around or have flexibility to deploy a fixed asset within a site, whether it's a casino or a factory, or robotics is key use cases. But I think the ability to also, since it's your hose, to use that horrible analogy, you can actually see what's flowing through it. That's a huge, huge thing. Ed, do you want to top off on that, and then we'll call it a day?
I think there's a lot of opportunity here for innovation. Obviously, it comes down to the economics. You could make or you can buy, and we would support all of those initiatives. It really comes down to the individual, let's call it CIO or let's say physical structure and location as to what works for them. But I think the key element here is all that data, all that IoT data. I go back to the principles of this is considered like first mile as opposed to last mile. There's a lot more data being generated at the edge, and we didn't get into edge data, but there's a lot of that data that needs to get in and get inferenced and processed to do the data reduction, and then put back in the cloud the types of data that be insightful information. So you can get that at the application level, but now mix that with the network and mobility aspects, which are now in two different domains, put them together in a private network in one, and what sort of insights can you have? And I think that's what Youssef was getting at, is that there's this whole wealth of sort of decision-making and predictive analytics that come along with that. And those things could be really, let's say, beneficial to any company in terms of overall efficiencies and productivity.
Or they can monetize the data.
Or some third party can monetize and pay you for the data,
exactly,
depending again on GDPR and privacy and security. And those, but we want to enable that capability. We're not, let's say, interested in owning and operating the data part of that. That's really the customer's perspective. But they have full control over that network.
That's interesting. I hadn't realized it, but it makes perfect sense. So I'm glad, Youssef, that you dropped that little knowledge bomb.
I know. I mean, in terms of IoT, there's a use case that this will enable you. For example, you get people that flooding into the event, right? And sometimes they have different gates, right? And then it would be nice to know that when a user comes in, say, look, don't go to gate 27. There's no line in gate 15. And also same thing for food services. And having that data and turned into action, it only enhances that quality of service and convenience. And beside the other stuff that we know what to do. I mean, it's all data-driven decision making, both from business and from the technology point of view, to provide solution.
No, that's perfect. So I'm going to thank you both. I mean, what I've gotten from this is that, again, the conference is all about 5G. It's an IoT conference. And we've been talking about the importance of the edge and private networks. And I think you highlighted some very, very, very important items here. So I want to thank you both very much. And again, Ed, I want to thank you and American Tower for your continued sponsorship and work with us on Connected Things. And we're looking forward to getting back in person. And like I said, maybe this fall. If not, for sure, we'll start our regular rotation back up in, believe it or not, March of 2022. So thanks to you both.